Welcome to the first lecture of this course. In this lecture, I'm going to introduce you to the command center of the brain, and I'm going to show you what exactly the command center is doing in our brain and how it contributes to our personality. And to do that, I want to introduce you to a man named Phineas Gage, who had an accident that completely changed his personality. So this is Phineas Gage, and as you can see here, he is lacking the left eye. And that is because this pole he's holding here was propelled into his head by an explosion. And the pole effectively destroyed a part of his brain, and that changed him. So let's have a look at how he changed. Let's have a look at how people described him before and after the accident. Before the accident, he was described as intelligent, hardworking, responsible, and he was generally respected. But that changed after the accident. After the accident, he was quite remarkably still very intelligent, but his personality did change. After the accident, he was described as indulging, obstinate, disrespectful, and impatient. And actually, his friends who knew him very well said that he's no longer Gage. He's not the same person anymore. So something in his brain got destroyed that is very important for his personality, and especially for him to be what we would call a good person. So what part of his brain got destroyed? Here you can see where the pole hit his brain. The pole actually entered his skull through his mouth, and from there it crushed through the frontal part of the brain. Now the big question is, what function of his brain got impaired by that? And to understand that, let's have a look at the general anatomy of the brain. What you see here is a cross-section of the brain that shows you what the brain would look like if we would cut through it through the middle of our eyes. And what you can see here is that in the middle there's this core, and wrapped around that there's another part of the brain. And the brain areas in this core are called the subcortical areas of the brain. And these areas are responsible for the most basic functions of our brain. They're responsible for our sleep, they're responsible for hunger, they're responsible for emotions, and they're responsible for our habits. And wrapped around the subcortical areas is the so-called cortex, or as we could say, the cortical areas. And those areas are responsible for higher functions. They're responsible for our attention, they're responsible for our planning, and they're responsible for more complex actions that are not so habitual. Now the thing is that what the subcortical areas may be doing and what the cortical areas may be doing can be in conflict with each other. Sometimes we want to pay attention even though we are sleepy. Sometimes we're planning to work but we are actually hungry and we want to stop. Or sometimes we need to do something that we aren't used to, such as sleeping at an unusual time or working at an unusual time, and then we have to work against our habits. So the subcortical areas and the cortical areas do not always work together, and therefore we need a mediator. And that mediator is the frontal part of the cortex. It's the most frontal cortical area, and therefore this area is called the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex is involved in what is called executive control. It's basically the command center of our brain. If you think of the brain as a spaceship, then the prefrontal cortex would be the bridge. And one of the most central key aspects of executive control is to inhibit our impulses. Think, for example, of the situation when you're on a diet and you need to inhibit the impulse to eat. You need to inhibit your cravings. Or when you're tired and you really need to work and you need to force yourself to work. You need to inhibit the impulse to rest or get distracted by something that would be much more fun to do. And executive control is also necessary for holding our attention. Right now you're holding your attention on my voice, but I'm pretty sure that in your environment there are things that are distracting you. There may be noises, there may be things going on around you, and in order to prevent that your attention gets drawn away from me, you need to exert executive control. You need to inhibit the distractions. And two things that executive control does for us in our everyday life are, first, it keeps us focused on our goals, for example, our goal to diet or to work. And second, it enables us to look beyond our own needs and desires. For example, it enables us to share something nice, such as a cake, for example, rather than just having it for ourselves. And a good example, what happens without executive control, is Phineas Gage. Because he was unable to inhibit his impulses, he became indulging, he became obstinate and disrespectful because he could not adjust his behavior enough to other people's opinions and feelings, and he became impatient because every impulse had to be followed immediately. He could not wait for anything. So as you can see, our ability to exert executive control in our prefrontal cortex is really important for determining who we are and it is necessary for us to be a good person. Alright, that was the lecture on the command center of the brain. And in the next lecture, we're going to zoom out a little bit and have a look at the everyday functions that our brain is engaging in all the time without us realizing it.